Hey, Artie Fahey and Jack Ellis here, and we're going to be talking about how to not only weather your structures, but also how to add some interesting color variations to the scenes they sit in. We're talking about the line of pan pastels, which we now handle here. We handle only 2 items from them, but it's kind of the do-all items. And we're going to just go over quickly what you need, what you don't, what you may know, and maybe what you don't know. Jack, there's more than one way to weather a structure. I'm thinking of airbrushing, I'm thinking of chalks, and I'm thinking of powders. So why don't you give us the pluses and minuses of each of those 3 different methods?
Well, if you're going to airbrush, airbrush is great. It atomizes paint. It puts it on a very thin coat. You can make it very thin or very dark depending upon what you want. One of the downside is that you have to thin the material you're going to spray most of the time, not always. And then you have to clean the brush when you're done. So you got to get it clean and then put it away and be ready for the next time. Pan pastel chalks, which is the way we used to do this. We used to use pastels and things like that, where we scrape the chalk and get the colors that we wanted. They're good. The only problem with chalks are they have a tendency to rub off on your hands. They have to be fixed on them, so they don't do that. They tend to see when you fix them, they disappear. You got to put a little bit more on. They like a nice rough texture to go on to. So when we get, the next step is into the pan pastels and into the weathering powders. These are made to actually stick, the way that they engineer them. So they don't really rub off a little bit, but not anywhere near chalk. It's just an easy way to put it on, and if you work from the lighter side to the darker side, they're easy to work with. To a point, you can actually get an eraser and erase some of these colors right off if you really have to.
Well, you know, one of the things I like about the pan pastels is they are very controllable. They blend together like a palette, and they're seamless. You don't see different the graduations are so gradual that they just work visually. The other thing is I love doing airbrushing. Now, I used to do a lot of airbrushing, and I think I don't know if you got that much involved with it.
I do some.
But the thing of it is, I used to go through an awful lot of paint, and once in a while you'd also get some spitting with the airbrush. So what we're going to do now is try to keep this a little bit short, and Jack is going to go over his set of pan pastels, which is, believe it or not, different than my set of pan pastels. I'm going to focus more on scenic scrubs, and Jack is going to focus on his specialty, which is building scale model structures.
So what we're going to look at now is this pack of 10. These colors are particular to more closely to use when you're doing structures and things like that than instead what Art's going to talk about on scenery colors. So this one has a pain gray, a black, red iron oxide, raw umber, burnt sienna. Then it has a burnt sienna tint, which is an off-white, and then we have a raw umber tint, which is close to white, and then we have a natural gray tint, which is a lighter gray, and then we have titanium white. These are all colors that you would use basically when I'm using to do my buildings. The red oxide makes a good rust if you're doing some rust movement. Blacks, you can accent and highlight things with the black and also with the white. The other thing we didn't talk about before, which is very interesting with pastels and weathering chalks, is they have what they call a hard edge. When you stop wearing pastels, they kind of fade into the next, whatever the next color is or whatever it is. There is no hard edge to it, and paint always has a hard edge. You can get a little bit of that out without the spray paint, but the pastels work really well that way. So I'll use maybe a brown along the bottom edge of the building. I'd use black to highlight my shingles and my tar paper, and the grays and the whites for streaking and things like that. So there's a lot of things you can use in just this one little tube.
Well, you know, my favorite things are on that one, even though we're talking about it for structures, I use titanium white all the time, because when I'm putting down ground cover, I'll typically use real dirt. I'll glue it down really solidly, and I will start scrubbing with a brush, not using sponges, but using brushes, scrubbing colors into them and letting them blend. And if I want to put down a path and I want it to look a little worn, I'll put down the color of the path so there's some variation between this part of the scene and that part of the scene and that part of the scene. But when I start using titanium white, to me, if you scrub it in enough, it'll mix with what you're putting it on top of and will give the look of a worn path. So you don't have to use it just for structures. The other thing, I like having the different shades of gray. Black is 100% gray, obviously, and everything else is a variant. And I love to do it because if you're placing something like garbage pails or 55-gallon drums next to a building and you've worked on them and you've painted them and you've gotten them all set to go, when you put them on a scene, the important thing to me is not only the detail part, but the fact that the area around those garbage pails should have some environmental impact. It's going to be a little dirtier there than it's going to be, say, 10 or 15 feet from there. So I will use the pan pastels and the fact that they're so controllable to kind of scrub a color in around those details and visually really enunciate and pronounce those details even more, because you're seeing the detail plus the area around the detail that makes it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As for me, I have a different set here. Now you have a bunch of colors. I've got different colors, and I'll put these up on the screen. But this is a pan pastel set. There's a number on here someplace. And basically here again it has a 10 color set, and it's called Extra Dark Warm. And Frank Bernard, one of our builders, mentioned that I should get the set because I've been buying these individually, and it's actually, Jack, cheaper to get the whole set than to buy one at a time. Mm-hmm. And this comes with like different yellows and greens, and even a little bit of a blue and a red. Now those colors, Jack, if I'm not mistaken, you do have like a rusty color, which is something here again I would use around garbage pails or something. Any place where there's machinery, the ground may very well have that kind of a look. But I don't think you're looking at, with that set, any kind of a green or anything.
In this set there's a raw umber that has a greenish tint to it, but not a big dark green. It's a very pale, not pale green, but a very subtle green is maybe what is a better term.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't tend to use all these greens on a building. I just can't imagine
well,
really bringing too many of them in.
I do use a green around the base of the building, because you'll have a little mold and a little mildew always right where the building meets the ground. So a little bit of accent, but not a lot of it. So a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I use greens and especially yellows. I love using yellows just like titanium white. And what I'll do is I'll find an area, maybe have an area that has a lot of ground turf on it, some kind of grass or bushes or something. And I'll take the green and I'll scrub it around that area so there's a transition between the bush or the grass and possibly the brown, because here again I do use real dirt. The brown areas around it so they blend into each other. And here again, the thing is to add shadows to a lot of things too. Basically, as far as I'm concerned now, these come with sponges. I use a brush, Jack. You use?
I use a brush. Here's a couple here. You can see they're very short bristled, very stubby brush. It doesn't need a lot. The other thing I use with these are Post-it notes. But what I'll do is I'll dip this into my pan pastels, and I'll tap a little bit of it off, so I make sure I just have a very little bit on my brush, so I work it in. If I need a little more, I'll go back a little bit more, but it's easy to work from a little bit to lighter to darker is basically the term. So if I put a little bit on, I need a little bit more, I can do it. But tapping the brush on I get a little bit off, and then I can work it from there. I love working it that way.
Now, I could be off on this, but have you not at one point or another mixed some of the pan pastels with some other liquid kind of a form?
If you want to make sure you put it exactly where you want and you use a very fine brush, if you take a little bit of alcohol and dip some pan pastels, you can make like a little paste, and dip your brush in the alcohol, dip it in the paste, and then you can draw very fine lines of rust and things like that, or any color you want actually. And if you get a little bit too much, you can then wash it down with some alcohol, and it will run down the building just like the rain would make it run down the building.
Well, I consider these more of a special effects package where they add all kinds of things that people look at and they don't know why everything looks so real. And both Jack and I have been asked this hundreds of times, how come your models look so good? How come they look so real? A lot of it has to do with the introduction and the controllability of color in your models. Now, if you were a novice modeler, and you getting into this, you went out and you did your best, you did your duty to get the right kind of glue and some clamps and a straight edge and an X-Acto knife and a cutting mat, and you were to choose a media. Now, we're not talking about coloring buildings here with this. We're talking about basically special effects and things that really just bring these things to life when you look at them. Would you tend to lean, from a beginner standpoint, more towards one media than the other, and why?
one media.
Well, in other words, chalks as opposed to powders, as opposed to an airbrush, as opposed to dry brushing. Is anything a little bit more foolproof, a little more remedial, or is pretty much the same thing all the way through it?
These pan pastels, these chalks, these pan pastels and these weathering powders are a lot easier to use than anything else that you're going to use, just because you can put them where you want. You can actually sometimes get them off if you want. And if you do them a little at a time, you can work up to the darker color, which some mediums it's very hard to do. Once you paint it, it's painted. You can't get it off. The other thing I've used with the pastels is when I've been doing to color our resin castings, which are stone. I'll use my browns and my grays to actually color the stones and then work them into the stone with some alcohol and then go over it with a wash, and it's done. It's very simple, very fast to do. So that's one more application you can use with the pastels.
Well, each of these containers has 10 colors, but each of these colors, when mixed, can make 1,000 shades of whatever. There's nothing you can't mix with something else here.
Right.
For me, it's very common to use, here again I say titanium white over another color. You change the color underneath it substantially, and you don't go through that much of this. I find that this stuff has been lasting me a long time.
I've had some of mine 5 or 6 years without even close.
Well, I think other than that, do we have any closing suggestions or anything on this?
No, no. If you're going to build a lot of more structures, you want to pick up this kit. If you want to add to your scenery and add some more different colors, you might be able to use them too on buildings. Because when you start to take a bright green or a greenish color painted building, if you want to soften that color, you can soften it with the pastels a little bit too, as an overall type of thing.
It's a good way to control contrast, visual contrast. From a diorama point of view, from my perspective, all these colors are great, but I have to tell you, I do lean an awful lot into the titanium white and the black, and there's various shades, but especially the blacks and the titanium whites. And for that, honestly, you may not need to buy that whole tube over there. You can buy individual ones. I like having both tubes. One size fits all. It doesn't. These are not meant to color the actual structures. They are not meant to paint the land, but they add subtle textures that really bring it to life. And the thing of it is, it looks so natural that people don't even realize you've done it.
Yeah, there's one other thing that we didn't really mention is if you've got something that has a shine on it, and you need to take that shine off by using the color of the pan pastels, maybe it's the paint or that like that, it's going to take that shine right off it and leave it as a flat color, which makes a huge difference, I think, in the realistic ability of the model of the diorama.
Well, I think that's going to be it. It's run a little long as it is. These are now available at a discount, 20% standard Bar Mills discount through the website. And of course, you can get these at our supply stores. I do particularly like the selections where you get 10 at a time. They're different enough to be different, but they do work with each other. It's like Martha Stewart put these things together because they're just perfect. And they're more affordable this way too. And they stack. I love the stacking business on these things.
They do all stack, but this is nice to have them all stacked. So.
Absolutely. So that's it for Jack. My name's Artie, and thank you for joining us at Bar Mills on this discussion about pan pastel.